free.
She said, let us proceed. Thank you, Alan, for joining us. Alan is the author of the book Side Hustles, and he must have a wealth of ideas about how we can do, because we get 24 hours in a day. I myself wish I could double that into 48 and 24, but and I'm sure Alan has some great ideas for us, and we're delighted to have him on board. And his book Side Hustle is an amazing view, and thank you. And so, Alan, please, it's your floor.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And actually, so the book's definitely called, as you mentioned, Side Hustles, but more specifically, if people are familiar with the Dummies series of books, it's been around for about 30 years. Specifically, it's Side Hustles for Dummies. And John Wiley and Sons, who's the publisher, they like to say that they use the term dummies in a kinder, gentler manner. By no means is it, condescending or negative. It's just a brand of books that was started back in the early 1990s, primarily for technologists, when personal computers were coming about and people were kind of intimidated still. The publisher at the time that Wiley eventually bought started this line of books called the Dummies series. So Word for Dummies and PCs for Dummies. And they've, expanded that series over the years. So I've written a number of books in that series. And the most recent one, ironically, is considering writing books as a side hustle for me. It is about side hustles for dummies. So what I'm going to do is just take a few minutes just to go through what side hustles are. Most people have at least some familiarity with them, but I want to sort of set the stage, talk a little bit about why side hustles are so popular today and why so many people have side hustles going, or at least are thinking about side hustles. I'll take a minute or so just to give you a brief background on my own side hustle journey, since I've been doing side hustles for about 40 years. And then go through, and this is really important. Most people equate side hustles with, I'm doing something on the side because I'm trying to make extra money, which certainly is one of the primary reasons, but by no means is that the only reason someone does a side hustle. And then I'll talk a little bit about just some of the, hundreds or thousands of options available and how we want to match that up with our personality and our interests and things like that. So first of all, you can probably guess, if you didn't know what a side hustle is, just from the name. It's a hustle, a job, something you're doing, a task, and you're typically, though, doing it on the side from your day job. So, for example, when I first started doing side hustles, I was a U.S. Air Force officer back in the early 1980s. I was working on old, antiquated computer technology, and this is back when personal computers were first showing up. So what I did, it's not like I could walk away from my Air Force job. I owed them a certain amount of time as a lieutenant and a captain, but I wanted to learn a little bit about technology, the newer technologies. So I started on the side a little consulting and software business, and I've been doing, I'll tell you a little bit more shortly about my own side hustle journey. But the idea is, as I've had my various day jobs over the years, and as many people have their day jobs, by no means are they limited to those jobs as essentially the only thing that they do professionally. So that's the idea behind a side hustle. It's something on the side. Ironically, the term goes back to the 1950s. I was surprised to discover that when I was doing some extra research for the book. But for the most part, we didn't really use the term side hustles in a common manner until probably the last 10, 15, 20 years. Typically, we would talk about a moonlighting type job or a second job or something like that. But no matter what the term is, it's, as I mentioned, some type of a job that you are doing, or maybe even more than one job on the side from your day job. Now, why are side hustles so popular today? Well, what's interesting is we are seeing just in the last couple years this confluence of these big mega forces, which even people that have never done a side hustle before are at least looking at them and thinking about them, and in many cases actually starting them. So go to the whole term, the gig economy, GIG, which many people have heard. The idea is that a lot of people, for their professional lives, they're not necessarily doing traditional career-oriented jobs, whether it's their own company or their own entrepreneurial venture or working for, a typical corporation or a governmental agency. They're driving for Uber or Lyft. They're delivering for Instacart. They're doing dog sitting through Rover or whatever it happens to be. There's these gigs, essentially little projects, mini engagements, to use the consulting vernacular, and someone essentially builds a portfolio out of these gigs, and that is how they make a living. So that's been a mega force for the last couple of years. It really hit overdrive once the COVID pandemic started, and a lot of places shut down. A lot of companies either laid off people or kind of had everybody working at home. Whatever the particular situation was during the past couple years, primarily because of the COVID economy and the immediate aftermath, there was an acceleration of gig economy type jobs, as well as an acceleration of people doing other types of side hustles that don't necessarily fit into that bucket. Then you may have heard or seen the term the Great Resignation. Also, in concert with the pandemic and the aftermath, a lot of people have taken a step back and said, you know what? The traditional career path that my parents did, that maybe I started out doing, is not necessarily, upon further reflection, how I really want to spend my professional life. So people have been resigning en masse from a lot of corporate life or even just regular service type jobs. Now, that's fine in the abstract, but people still have to make a living. And where people tend to gravitate, if they, quote, resign from corporate or traditional professional life, they tend to gravitate towards one or more of these side hustles, these, traditional things that we would do on the side of our day job. And that becomes their portfolio of the things that they are essentially building. So let me just tell you a little bit for about a minute or so about my own side hustle journey, because the reason I wound up writing Side Hustles for Dummies was that I've been in professional life for about 42 years or so right now. I've been doing side hustles for about 40 of those 42 years. So I mentioned I was a U.S. Air Force officer. I started a little consulting and software company on the side, primarily to learn a little bit more about the newer technologies and also to make a little more money than your second lieutenant back in the early 1980s would typically make. The first book I ever wrote was yet another side hustle. I wrote a book about how to start a little consulting and software business on the side of your day job. So I essentially created a new side hustle, writing books out of my first side hustle. And that book led to about 29 or 30 other technology and business books over the years. From those technology and business books, about 10 or 15 years ago, I started writing novels. So that is yet another side hustle. I started teaching on the side, and now I'm actually a full-time college instructor, and I do my consulting and other side hustles on the side. So teaching became a side hustle. Then I started doing videos, training courses about different technology subjects. That is yet another side hustle. So the whole idea is, whereas my side hustle journey is specific to me, everyone who's been doing this for a while has kind of a similar story. There's something they start off doing, and usually it leads to something else. So that's one of the nice things about side hustles. If you start to get bored or tired with a particular area, if it starts to maybe not be as lucrative as it once was, you can either sort of do a kind of a revamping of what you're doing, or maybe jump over to something else. Now, one of the other things I mentioned that I was going to talk briefly about was why people do side hustles. And as I mentioned, one of the primary reasons is a little extra money. You have your day job, you haven't gotten a raise, or like right now with inflation, as I was talking about these mega forces, inflation is rearing its head, and which we haven't had in about 40 years. Not everybody's getting raises, salary increases to keep pace with inflation. There's also on the horizon the possibility, if not necessarily a likelihood, of an economic downturn or even a recession. So people are starting to play defense a little bit and, have a little bit of nervousness about their day jobs. All of these are reasons that people do side hustles: to make more money, to learn new things within the realm of where they do their day job, for career broadening. If you're tired of your day job or the career you chose, and upon further review, if you could go back in time to college or to a prior point in your life, you might have done something different. A lot of people use side hustles as a jumping off point to a new career. Monetizing a hobby. So during the pandemic, during the last couple of years, one of the things that really boomed, not only as a hobby in and of itself, but side hustles related to that hobby, were things like baseball cards and sports memorabilia. People, while they were stuck at home, were going up into their attic or down to their basement or back into the closet, pulling out their sports cards and memorabilia that they might have still had stashed there. And a lot of people started creating side hustles related to them, selling some of those cars, or maybe buying cars and flipping them on eBay, doing podcasts or YouTube videos about different aspects of the hobby. There's all kinds of things that people would start doing. So that's another key point. When you're thinking about a side hustle, there's usually 3, 4, 5, maybe even more different variations on what you can do about a particular subject area. So let's say you have a hobby or an interest in cooking, and you want to try to monetize that hobby a little bit and make a little money through a side hustle. Well, you could actually sort of rent yourself out as a chef for parties for the weekends. Or you could do YouTube videos that you monetize through ads and affiliate links that you post on YouTube or on TikTok. Or you can actually create a cooking course, which you put up on a site like Udemy or Teachable, that people actually buy the course, or some combination of those. So the nice thing about side hustles is you can match them to your personality. You can match them to your available time. Some side hustles are more schedule dependent. Others are more freewheeling. Some, like courses that you may put up to sell or to try to monetize videos, are what we would typically call passive income side hustles. You're not working in lockstep to sort of earn money per hour. You're doing something which may never earn a penny, or it could pay you a lot of money every month for doing very little or nothing even as time goes on. And a lot of side hustles are kind of hit and miss. You have to try a couple things and see what works for you. And, essentially that's what I covered in the book, all this laying the groundwork for a side hustle, how to match it up with your personality, how to get a business going, trying to decide how to run it as a business, because it actually is a business. How to decide when it might be time to expand or even go full time, whether you should do a side hustle on your own or with other people, maybe friends or family members, when you might want to shut down a side hustle or do something else. So these are things that I covered as well in the book.
Very good. Thank you, Alan. That was amazing. Well, a couple of things came to mind in terms of your considerations and presentation. One was the foolish assumption about a side hustle. You mentioned that in the book, and said that a side hustle does offer you the capacity to expand and produce it further, or to let it go, depending upon your scenarios with that. If you don't mind, share that with us. Because many people have this perception about let's say, typical example. A side hustle could be, if you like fashion or clothes, you work in the clothing store. But I think that, of course, if you work in a clothing store and the money that you make in the clothing store, you get to buy clothes with it. How profitable can that be? Especially if you get a good budget for clothes. You don't have to spend money for clothes because you get a great discount. So just talk to us a little bit about
Sure.
that.
Well, I'll give you a great example related to that. So my wife started a side hustle, creating an online boutique about 4, maybe 5 years ago, primarily based around Facebook advertising, Facebook groups, because there had been a lot of success people had. So she gets it going, starts ramping it up, and Facebook changes their algorithms, changes their rules for how groups work, and essentially took away the ability for a lot of small businesses to do as effective or as cost effective a job advertising and reaching out to new customers as they once had. It was kind of Facebook's big shift a couple of years ago, more towards corporate advertising as opposed to small business advertising. So and it wasn't just my wife's business, it was a lot of people who ran boutiques. You could tell by looking when they would go live on Facebook and do, like their, hey, here's my new inventory, and people would use something like comments sold to buy stuff real time. You looked at the number of views and they were way off. The amount of activity was way off. So there's a great example where my wife looked at this and she said, okay, I could pour a ton more money into this to totally change paths, or I can try something slightly different. And she wound up switching over more to blogging, not just about fashion and clothes, but more lifestyle blogging with a fashion and clothing element. So that's one of the things about side hustles. And a lot of the things we have, there's a lot of external factors that we don't have control over that we do need to be aware of. And sometimes we need to change direction as a result.
That's a very good comment.
Yeah, and I think our group has got a lot of veterans. We've got Sergeant Reginald here with us. And so this is a great book for us because we've been doing a lot of workshops and programs. I'm looking forward to having you back. But thank you again today.
One second, though. I do have a comment or question. And just as a sidebar, it came to me, if you're at a business conference or business networking forum and you cultivate a conversation with someone and you discover there's a need within that scope with the business and you can fulfill that need, I mean, how difficult would it be to say, would you pay for that? It's such as, I mean, if a client has services that they're offering, but they're falling behind in their bookkeeping or accounting, would you pay for help and support with your bookkeeping? I mean, it's not an official position, but you ask them if they'd pay for it. So it's a side hustle now. So I have to commend you for writing this book, Alan, because it does explore with professionals alternatives to make more money. And it tells us that we live in a time where you shouldn't just consider what you do. I mean, you consider what you want to do. I mean, and also Lisa's perspective, you shouldn't. I mean, I think we're moving into a realm where we work and we do what we really enjoy doing. Because they tell me that if you do what you love doing, you never work a day in your life. I mean, because it's really practical application. I mean, in businesses and understanding the challenges with business and understanding how do I get from, GoFundMe to legacy. Yeah, that's important. That's right. So any other questions? I want to make sure I didn't just hog that up. Any other questions for Alan? This is an amazing book. And he also spends the time to articulate what it looks like for you to do side hustles, and also time, and that's an important aspect, managing your time with your side hustles. I mean, of course, it doesn't make sense for you to have the side hustle and then they start interfering with your regular work time. I can't get to work on time. The side hustle's taking over. Yeah, but anyway, thank you for that. Are there any other questions, please? I'd like to make sure that I, want to listen to people.
A hand. Do I see a Zoom hand raised, Reginald?
Yes, Reginald.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alan, I love your presentation. We're an Air Force officer. I was enlisted in my career in the Army, and I did different things because people look at the uniform and they get the perception, they're just rolling in it because they're wearing a uniform. They don't understand that military has bills like everyone else. And when you start out, you're not making as much as the people who've been doing it a long time. So I know from my own personal experience, I did a number of things. I worked I worked at Dollar General. I drove for a funeral home. I did all kind of things that my time would allow me to do. Mainly, it kept me out of trouble because sometimes if you got too much time on your hands, then it opens yourself up for other things. So I wanted to take that time to do constructive things, and it helped to have a little money at the end of the month between when there's more month than there is money, which sometimes that's the case for a lot of people. So a lot of times the side hustles are just they're wonderful and they're just godsends indeed. So I thank you for presenting this because this is much needed for a lot of people.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for that. All right.
Thank you so much for watching. Tell us about your side hustle, get the book, and definitely sign up, take advantage of the Brightside discount for the Ascentim Grow program. And we'll make sure we have all these links available. You're watching Brightside Global Trade TV. Thank you for spending this great time with us, and tell us what you think about the show.